Thank you to everyone for coming out to our group author reading. This reading is brought to you by Strong Women, Strange Worlds, which is a group of authors supporting authors. Our mission is to elevate the voices of women and other underrepresented gender identity authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror through events like our bi-monthly virtual quick read session. You can find out more about Strong Women, Strange Worlds in the handout we've provided in the chat and by visiting our website, a link which will also be added to the chat, but it's strongwomenstrangeworlds.weebly.com. I'd also like to take a moment to thank those of you who have made a tip jar donation. Thank you. We appreciate you guys so much. I am your host today, Kate, and you can find out more about me in that provided handout as well. Please note that recording of this session by the audience is not allowed, and recording of electronic communications, including Zoom meetings and webinars without permission, is illegal. Today, we will be featuring 6 authors: Patricia Miller, Melody Johnson, Quinn Connor, Natalie Wright, Casey Berger, and Faye Snowden. Each author will have 8 minutes to read. Our first reader is Patricia Miller. Patricia Miller is a member of SFWA and Codex, who writes science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Publications include short fiction in numerous anthologies, Metastellar, Zooscape, and Cinnabar Moth Literary Collection. A complete listings of stories, her occasional blog posts, and more info can be found at trishmillerwrites.com. Patricia, take it away.
Thank you, Kate. Picture Perfect is my professional debut story. I'll paste a link in the chat to a post about how the story was written and developed. I have added a few dialogue tags to the story as it was originally written to make it easier for you to keep track of the dialogue. I'll be giving away a copy of the anthology to a random entrant at the proper time in a couple weeks. It was one of those isolated, rambling country houses that spoke of old money, bloodlines, and generational trusts. My parents had one just like it. I had never understood the appeal of our family's summer home. It was too isolated, too crowded, too overwhelming with the sheer volume of noise and drama. This house seemed different, though, more alive than lived in. The portico covering the front entrance dwarfed my car. It was from an era when horse-drawn carriages needed to be sheltered from the weather, not 10-year-old Hyundai wagons. I parked under the granite arches and mounted the stairs leading to a massive front door. A clock inside chimed the hour as I rang the doorbell. An elegant man of indeterminate age opened the door almost immediately and waved me in. We did not exchange greetings. He led me upstairs and showed me 3 rooms, each with 9 empty easels set up to display my work for his perusal. You may choose which room you think would suit them best. Will you need assistance? He asked. No, thank you. He nodded. Take what time you need. The sunny glass-lined room in the south side of the house was the perfect venue. I made 9 round trips to the car and back, careful not to bump the oak wainscoting or, more importantly, the canvases. Some of them were still slightly damp. I pulled out my new cell phone, used the camera to document the original positioning of the easels, checked sight lines, sunlight, and shadows. The portraits were grouped, arranged, rearranged by age of subject, by size, by style. It took just over an hour before I was able to step back, satisfied to watch the play of light across the monochromatic faces in front of me. I left the room and peered over the carved balustrade. He was waiting patiently downstairs in the foyer. I cleared my throat ever so softly. At that signal, he climbed the stairs with an enviable ease and grace, joining me on the landing, and I escorted him to the sunroom. The easels were arranged in a serpentine fashion toward the west end of the room, displayed in chronological order, oldest to newest, from right to left. The head of the lineup greeted us at the door, and the last was turned toward the windows. Silently, he approached the first portrait. I held my breath. A tilt of the head, a bend at the waist to look more closely, a blink. He smiled left to the next canvas. He shifted to the next canvas, then the next, moving at his own pace. Some of the faces received no more than a cursory acknowledgement. Others took long minutes of examination. I was certain no detail was overlooked. He did not take notes, nor did he offer any comment or ask any questions until he'd viewed them all. "You were asked to paint the truth," he stated. "Yes." "Then if I may, let me tell you the truth as I see it in your work." I nodded agreement, and we started at the beginning, a full 3/4 portrait of a flawlessly maintained 50-something woman, pretending she wasn't a day over 40. "Your mother, if I'm not mistaken." She was a well-known face to anyone familiar with the social register. "Did she ever see you?" "I was a trophy, trotted out on special occasions as proof of her beneficence, until I outgrew that cute orphan phase. Once that happened, I was invisible to her. It's amazing what you can see in someone when they don't see you at all. And your father, practically a blank canvas to everyone. He was a little more than 3 thin slashes on gesso, a bare shadow of a profile." "He was a means to an end," I replied. "He had money to add to the family fortune and a good gene pool." Meaning his genes wouldn't overwhelm hers, I imagine. The family likeness has always been striking. My sister, classically beautiful, barely rated a second glance. "America has no need for princesses anymore," he sniffed. Her husband received a closer inspection. "Dear God, what an ass. I keep hoping the Homo Americanus frat boy will die out, but they still roam amongst us." "He was my brother's college roommate. A perfect match for my sister," I explained. "She worshipped him, and he quoted romantic poetry to her. And all the while he was trying to corner you in the dark?" "Yes. He and my brother had a bet. Neither of them managed to collect on it." "And this, then, is your brother. What's his head count?" "His third wife left him 2 months ago. She was willing to put up with the other women, the drugs, the alcohol. It was the temper that wore her down." The next 3 portraits were of my uncle and 2 cousins. They received wordless shakes of the head, but no comment. He stared at the last portrait for some time, moving from one side to the other to view it from different angles, even pulling out a magnifying glass to examine the brushstrokes. Finally, he straightened up and took a deep breath. "She hated you, hated your very existence. Why?" Why indeed, I thought. I never understood my Aunt Brendel until it was too late, although I learned early on that to even call her that made it worse. She never spoke of me without adding, "She's adopted, you know, to my name." She hated the idea of me, I told him. She hated the idea of my questionable heritage polluting the family bloodline. Always said that blood will tell, and in my case, it wouldn't have anything good to say. And she had made certain that would never happen. The surgical scar was nearly invisible to the eye, but it echoed inside the hollow where my uterus should be. He backed away from the easels to the long bank of windows along the room's southern wall, leaning on one of the marble sills. The subtleness of the shading, the play of sunlight on the features, you picked the right room for your display. The details would have been lost in shadow, I said. True, he agreed. It's an impressive body of work. Although they are different in style, they are the same in substance. Any unbiased observer would agree the same hand painted each portrait. Well, thank you. As an exercise, it was more cathartic than I expected. And is the series complete, he asked. I would say so, yes. He reached out then, took hold of my right hand. He raised it to his lips, pressed a gentle kiss on a barely there scratch straddling my lifeline. Then welcome to my studio. I'm looking forward to seeing you work with a more expansive palette. He grinned, and I smiled for the first time. The monochromatic faces from my family tree had no more power to hurt me, and I no longer had to suffer for my art. Although it turned out they did. It was a shame their blue blood only came in red. Thank you.
That last line. Yes. Ah. Oh, I have I've got all sorts of thoughts about it. We'll talk afterwards.
Well, thank you very kindly.
All right. Our second reader is Melody Johnson. Melody Johnson is the award-winning author of The Love Beyond and Nightblood series. Earning the 2021 Maggie Award of Excellence, Beyond the Next Star is an exciting branch from Melody's paranormal romance roots, keeping the dark grit from her Nightblood series and taking it to new worlds. Ooh, intriguing. Melody, take it away.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be reading today from Sight Beyond the Sun. It's my newest release published back in January, and it's the second book in my Love Beyond series, but it does stand alone. It's in third person, shifting between the hero and the heroine's point of view, and today I'm going to be reading from the heroine's point of view. Before noticing the existence of boys, before developing a sense of sarcasm and a taste for adrenaline, Kinsley Switch Morales fell head over heels for explosives. Lighters and sparklers when she was young, firecrackers and fireworks in grade school. At 11, she built her first homemade bomb with a watermelon set to a kitchen timer. Her parents' back porch still sported pulp stains. At 13, she branched out into more sophisticated triggers, magnets and cell phones, and was sure to put her internet history, clear it before putting her research to practical use. Some experiments didn't go as planned, which is why they were called experiments. But at 16, when one of her pressure-sensitive triggers happened to be a bit too sensitive, nearly taking out Sir Whiskers in addition to the barrel she'd been intending to blow, suddenly everyone questioned her motives. Suddenly, she intended to hurt people, and she needed doctors and counselors to reveal why. That's all anyone ever wanted to know. Why the cat? Why pressure triggers? Why explosives? Why couldn't she just join the soccer team like Reese and make friends and play nice like a normal teenager? Her parents would never understand because it had absolutely nothing to do with why. She didn't want to hurt anyone. She didn't want to hurt herself. She didn't want to destroy her future or their lives, and she most certainly did not want to do anything like her sister, soccer or otherwise. She wanted to press a button and watch the sparks fly. By 17, Kinsley could construct and defuse, time switch, command, and remote detonated bombs. She could dismantle and reassemble 3, 4, 6, and 8-cylinder combustion engines and hotwire nearly any motor vehicle. And according to the flight simulator, she'd work like a dog at Mickey's body shop the previous summer to earn. She could land a Cirrus SR-22 as well as she could take off. Her parents were enthusiastically supportive of her side passions for engines and aviation, anything that didn't risk burning the house to the ground. But it wasn't until she joined the Army that her unconventional talents were truly appreciated. 2 years in, Sergeant Colt Brandon, Special Forces, recruited her to join his ops team. And from that moment forward, for the first time in 20 years, Kinsley felt something inside her click into alignment. Brandon had never cared about the whys of it all, as long as she blew up what and who he wanted, how he wanted, and when he wanted it. Kinsley was thrilled to oblige. Little did she know at the time that her proclivity for danger, her obsession with explosives, and all that field experience would come so in handy after being abducted by aliens. Abducted by aliens. Of the many ways Kinsley had envisioned herself leaving Earth, an alien abduction had never been one of them. Exploding in an IED of her own making, sure. Exploding in an IED of someone else's making, absolutely, particularly during that last especially mission in Yemen. Of old age, not as possible, and not her preference, but certainly more likely than being abducted by aliens. She and her fellow 36 human captives had had the great misfortune of being caught in what Kinsley suspected was some sort of intergalactic human trafficking ring. Who knew the Georgia stretch of the Appalachian Trail was so rife with danger? She'd survived firefights in Afghanistan, for heaven's sake, but hiking in the deep woods of North Georgia, that's what did her in. She'd fallen asleep in peace, if not complete comfort, snuggled in her tent, and woke up the next morning suffering from the worst hangover of her life, from inside a cage. It hadn't been a hangover. It hadn't been the next morning. And after being herded from one cage to another, from one spaceship to another, she didn't intend to allow herself to be trafficked for much longer. Within a week on the second ship, Kinsley had discovered a convenient, if questionable, escape route from her prison cell, a network of ceiling shafts. Similar in form, if not function, to ventilation ducts, the shafts carried fire instead of air through the ship. A vent was positioned in the ceiling of each cell, including her own, the easier for the aliens to threaten execution by incineration and achieve their unwavering obedience. The easier for Kinsley to escape from her cell when the shafts weren't in use and explore the ship. Although perhaps easy was downplaying the near paralyzing fear she overcame with every escape. Even now, after 15 weeks and nearly 100 escapes, she still had to remind herself that the incineration shaft walls only felt like they were closing in. Her lungs weren't actually being crushed. She wasn't trapped, not this time. And considering the danger the shafts posed, she was more likely to fry like Riley than suffocate like Brandon. Funny how that morsel of logic didn't comfort her throbbing heart. But she did take comfort from the fact that the fire vents were positioned above the infirmary, galley, training room, even the cockpit, identical to the ones in the brig. Someone had constructed this spaceship with the ability to deliberately incinerate everyone inside, the crew as well as their prisoners. Obviously a thorough someone, a paranoid someone, Kinsley's kind of someone. A few loose screws here, another warning example there, and bam, everyone outside the brig would be reduced to ash. Kinsley smiled at the thought. Her Special Forces team hadn't dubbed her Switch for nothing. Reel it in, girl. One phase of her plan at a time. Until she finished learning how to operate, pilot, and maintain the spacecraft, she wasn't instigating a mass incineration and commandeering the ship. Not on purpose, anyway. Not yet. Thank you.
Oh, that was so good. I loved the voice. Like, your narrator's voice really comes through, and I think it was just choice. All right.
You.
Our third reader is Quinn Connor. Quinn Connor is one pen in two hands, Robin Barrow and Alex Cronin. Both writers from a young age, Robin and Alex met at Rhodes College and developed their unique co-writing voice. They are thankful that no matter what, there's always another person in the world who cares about their characters as much as they do. Oh, that's sweet. All right, Quinn Connor, the speaking voice, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Kate. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex. I am, as she said, one half of Quinn Connor. And our book, Cicadas Sing of Summer Graves, actually just came out 3 days ago, so this is really exciting for us. It is a book full of ghosts and set in the summertime at a beautiful lake, a lake that happens to be haunted. So the passage that we're going to be reading from today centers around one of our main characters, June. June has found an abandoned graveyard at the lake, and she has taken it upon herself to start cleaning it up and planting new flowers. But one day, just as it's coming to life, she receives an unexpected ghostly visitor alone among the gravestones. June stopped at the edge of the clearing, upturned dirt and new flowers sprouting between gravestones. She had half of them cleared off now, the names becoming visible again. There were beautiful flowering vines clinging to the trees and up the wings of a single weather-worn angel statue. Sunflowers peeked through on the edge, and spiky purple flowers, each with an individual trumpet. None of it had been there before. Just like that, all of her frustration, all of her cramped anger, it dissipated like mist facing the sun. She knelt beside the angel, touching gentle silk petals. "You don't look like the picture of milkweed on those seeds I bought," she said. "What are you?" The smell was familiar, like warm summer evenings, like lingerie. Jasmine, she realized. Jasmine, what are you doing here, gorgeous? The angel offered no answers. June stood again. There was no true order to the new growth that she was planting in the graveyard. It wasn't clean or in sensible rows, but mixed, blending, swirling, all the roots tangled under the earth. It was as wild and random as a bar fight. It wasn't a garden planted among gravestones. This unexpected upshooting was something else. It was chaos. "What are any of us doing here?" she asked. At the edge of the cemetery, the tributary of the lake shrugged with the far-off passing of a jet ski, ruffling lily pads the size of dinner plates. And maybe it was her imagination, but the jasmine seemed to shiver. Surrounded by new growth, June picked a spot for the primroses. She imagined them, little patches in the shade around a lion statue that she'd found at the antique shop and relocated. She bent until her lower back ached, cleaning moss off of the next row of gravestones and shoving aside undergrowth. She had no real gardening experience. The closest she had ever gotten to a garden was the apartment across the courtyard from the one that she and Mom had shared, where an elderly couple grew orchids, stately and ever so cool, like skinny women in tailored pantsuits. But sometimes she would sit, looking at a patch of tiny white flowers and think, those could do with some more sunlight. Or she'd see a coil of vine around the feet of an angel statue and think, that could use a little bit of fertilizer to really grow. There was a spindly tree growing in the sun near the water's edge. Its leaves flourished fat and green, bigger than her hand, and June knew that if she waited long enough, soon the little late-season green bulbs would ripen and she could bring Aunt Eliza the fresh figs. Growth could be violence ignited by the heating earth. It could be the selfishness of the race to the sun and the agony of new birth. It was aggressive colonialism. The hungry way gooseneck gobbled up every bit of earth. People forgot because flowers were so pretty, but chaos was a blooming thing too. Chaos also wanted to grow. It wanted to spread. But it didn't have to be violent, selfish, aggressive. Maybe this growth could be kind. June dug deeper under the cracked, warm dirt to the moist earth underneath and felt hours slipping away like dewdrops. She pictured the new growth that was to come. Black rosebuds, golden cornelias, and huge lily pads flowering at midnight, and something fragrant and vibrant blossomed inside her chest. She didn't fight it. If it hadn't been so quiet, however, she would have missed it. In the corner of her eye, she glimpsed something that was no leaf or petal, but the figure of a person. There was someone in her garden. June paused, hands on one of the primroses, a wrinkled little shallot half buried in the earth. There had been no sound, no twigs cracking under someone's feet, no sigh of moving branches, no polite greeting, nothing at all. It wasn't movement that had caught June's attention because the person hadn't walked up to her. They had not been there until in an instant they were. The two bare, muddy feet shifted and walked closer. June kept her eyes trained on her flowers. She did not want to face whatever was with her now. She had been alone today. She'd been sure of it, and now she was not. "What are you doing here?" the voice snapped. June kept her head down, breathing through the anxious alarm like an egg was stuck in her throat. "Planting flowers," she said after a moment. Bare knees stopped close to her, and June steadied her fingers. Cold wrath rushed over her from the figure. Why? "I don't mean any harm. I'm sorry." June was at a loss for what to do, only certain she didn't want to look up, not when she didn't know what she would see. Perhaps June was intruding. She was Goldilocks, stepping into someone's home, pulling weeds and planting flowers with good intentions, but not permission. The air at her neck was cold. Her skin turned clammy. The feeling didn't relent, but it didn't intensify. "When will they grow?" the person asked. June swallowed. "You're supposed to bury primroses early in the fall, let them sleep all winter, then they come up in spring." Her eyes watered and she blinked it back. "I'll go. I can go. I shouldn't be here. I'm sorry." "If you go, you won't get to see it grow," the girl reminded her. And something in the air had shifted. The pressure of cold winds eased. The storm averted, June's lungs filled with warm, sweet breath. Now the girl seemed pensive, almost curious. "Don't you want to see it grow?" "I don't think I can stay." June dared to dig another hole for the next primrose, trowel making soft, dry sounds. It seemed allowed now. "But I hope they grow." With bloodless fingers, heart still thrumming, June interred the next primrose under that heavy attention. until the girl spoke again. I've buried something too, near here. There was only a misty silence, mournful and encompassing like the scent of carnations. Not everything that gets buried grows. Maybe it's not in the right place. It could be getting too much sun, or it could be wrong for this type of soil. What is it? June pressed the next bulb into the ground, patted soil around it, and left it there to sleep. The girl let out a soft sigh, strange and quick, a mature kind of a sound. It was a box. June's hands, almost of their own accord, froze, picturing the heavy frame of the box that she had found buried. The light chinabone tinkle from something inside it. But her voice stayed light. She kept it light. Oh yeah? She asked. What was in the box? There was no answer, only mournful silence. When she dared to glance at where the feet had been standing, there was nothing, not a single bent blade of grass, much less a person. June raised her head. The garden was empty. It seemed to breathe in and then out with her, and the lake rippled, offering no reply.
Okay, but like, what did she bury? Like, what's in the box? What's in the box? What's in the box?
If I tell you, you're not going to read it.
Yeah, but what's in the box?
Secrets.
Clearly. Creepy secrets for sure. All right, well, thank you so much. Our fourth reader is Natalie Wright. Natalie Wright is the author of new epic fantasy, Seasons of the Dragon, chosen by Publishers Weekly Book Life as one of the 30 titles to showcase American indie publishing at Thessaloniki International Book Expo. She also co-hosts the popular science fiction fantasy podcast, Tipsy Nerds Book Club, and is a judge in the New York City Midnight International Short Story Competition. Take it away, Natalie.
All right. I am reading from Season of the Dragon, and in this section, Quinn, the main character, has been taken prisoner. She is being delivered to the capital to a menagerie. Mbika yanked on the chain and hissed, "Kneel." Quinn was about to obey, but Pelagia waved her up. "I am not the exalted Mbika. No kneeling is required here." Pelagia locked eyes with Quinn. She peered first into Quinn's right eye, the clear blue one, then the left amber-colored one. A Doja Nera from the Vindao. Her voice was a whisper. "No, from the Solmare," Mbika said. Pelagia circled them as if inspecting the package Mbika had delivered. "Where did you find her?" "Recovered at the Tilaj gates. She'd been traveling with Druvna's little band of rogue Shagaru." "What did Mbika mean by rogue, Shagaru?" Pelagia stood less than a pace in front of Mbika. "And you, loyal servant of the dynasty, took the Dojanira off Druvna's hands." "Of course, as Edict 42 mandates, and I have delivered it forthwith to the mistress of the menagerie, as the law requires." Pelagia was silent, but gave Mbika a cordial smile. She clicked her tongue, and the magnificent tiger rose from the perch atop the rocks, leaped over the stream in one easy jump, and sidled up to Pelagia. The tiger's head was half again as large as a person's. He was tall enough to stare Mbika in the eye. Pelagia stroked the cat's head. "Were you under the impression you may abuse and neglect a Dojanira?" "I never!" Mbika attempted to sound aghast at the accusation. Pelagia smirked, then once again regarded Quinn. Her movements were slow and deliberate, and she ran a long, thin finger along Quinn's jawline. Her touch was gentle. Pelagia grasped Quinn's hands, thrust her palms up, and examined them. Quinn's chains rattled, and Pelagia's smile disappeared. Spidery blue veins threaded Quinn's palms. They radiated from an intense blue at the center to a purple red at the fingertips. Mbika had said the evidence of her immolation spell was temporary, but in the days since the torture, the bruises had bloomed an even nastier shade of purple. "You immolated her." Pelagia's calm blue-gray eyes grew dark with anger. She attempted to escape. You could have subdued her. How else could I counter her power? The giant snow tiger curled his upper lip, showing a mouthful of pointy teeth fit for tearing and shredding flesh. His chest rumbled with a low growl. Oh, be still, Needy. Pelagia patted Needy's massive head, soothing him. You see, such primitive methods are unnecessary, even when calming a ferocious beast. She glared at Mbika. Now remove the shackles and chains. Mbika didn't invoke the spell to open the scorpion lock. I do not recommend it, not until you have shown you can control this Doja Nira. Pelagia's laugh was deep and throaty. I need show you nothing. You have delivered the Doja Nira as required. Your service is complete. Now remove the shackles, take your chains, and go. Needy growled again and bared his teeth, and Pelagia's glare could have withered a day-blooming desert marigold. Mbika wound her hands and thrust them toward the lock while whispering an incantation in the ancient tongue. I came far, you know. Lost a wagon, a yindril, and 2 horses on this errand. The scorpion lock's legs clicked forward and up, releasing their grip on Quinn's wrist. The shackles fell, revealing pale skin in contrast to the dirt covering the rest of her. Mbika retrieved the clunky cuffs, and Pelagia held 2 shiny gold kovars between her fingers. Mbika snorted, You think you need pay me, like a common trader, and I will be happy for your gold? Pelagia smiled wide. You are a money collector, no? Mbika still didn't grab the coins. Quinn knew little about how money worked beyond the soul mirror. She knew a copper kovar was worth many skins, and a silver one could buy 6 thukna, or a small herd of dray. She couldn't imagine how many thukna a gold kovar was worth. You want to leave empty-handed, and after all your troubles, Pelagia said. She slid the coins together, and they clinked. Mbika held out her hand, and Pelagia dropped the coins into her open palm, avoiding touching her skin. You will tell the Exalted, won't you? I'm the one who delivered the Doja Nira? Mbika's voice had lost its stoic indifference. She now sounded like a begging child. Pelagia again focused her attention on Quinn and gave her a bemused smile. Mistress, you will tell the Exalted? Pelagia waved her off. Yes, you did your duty. If I were you, I would go back to Southern Sands. Who knows, Mbika, you may be lucky enough to find another Doja Nira wandering the dunes. A few more gold kovars, and you can buy yourself out of the slums. Pelagia turned and flourished her remarkable cape, and as she did, a few butterflies moved, breaking the pattern. And Quinn gasped. She thought they had used dead butterflies to construct the cape, but these were alive. How does she control them to make them behave in such an odd way? If Pelagia's living cape awed Mbika, she didn't show it. Mark my word, you must watch yourself and take care with this one. Pelagia continued strolling away, and Needy patted after her. She may be a Rajani, Mbika called. Pelagia stopped. She called over her shoulder, Are you coming, Doja Nira? Quinn turned her gaze to Mbika, the woman who had taken her from her first kin, her friends, and her future. I wish Pelagia would allow Needy to sink his teeth into her. Mbika, her voice higher and more shrill, implored Pelagia, There are strange things afoot in Andrasi. What are these, Doja Nira? Is it related to the dragon? Pelagia continued walking, as though oblivious to Mbika's strident queries. She showed no interest in what Mbika said, not even the mention of a dragon. Quinn turned her back on Mbika. She followed Pelagia through the courtyard garden toward the impressive black lacquered door set with an intricate brass web. She hoped she'd never see the puffy-faced Mbika again. Pelagia slid through the doorway into a metalwork spider's web, and, desperate for answers, Quinn entered Pelagia's web.
I love that last line. Desperate for answers, she enters her web. That was so good. Whew. Y'all are, we got some good stories today. It always makes my TBR pile just get so big. Our fifth reader is Faye Snowden. Faye Snowden is the author of the Killing series, Flame Tree Press, featuring a homicide detective, Raven Burns. The second book in the series, A Killing Rain, is a finalist for the 2022 Forwards Indies Book of the Year Award. Learn more about Faye at faysnowden.com. And Faye, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you so much. Love that last reading and all the readings so far. You all, I am battling a cold, so my reading is going to be relatively shorter than the others. And if I cough in the middle, please show me a little bit of grace and feel sorry for me. I take all the sympathy. So I'm going to be reading from you for the prologue from A Killing Fire. So I don't think that I need to set it up at all. So I am ready to go. Thank you, Casey. I need all the healing wishes. Okay, here we go. Floyd Burns' father was a black boxer who tried on his own name just like his son did. He called himself Lightning Burns because of what he thought of as the speed of his flying fists. But he wasn't quick. Lightning, his real name was Hamlet, was slow. But once he caught up to the poor soul unlucky enough to be in the ring with him, he'd pound and pound on him just like he was a human spike driver fastening a railroad tie. Everybody called him Hammer because of it. Nobody called him Lightning, not even his wife. He didn't do much professionally, made a little money on the amateur circuit before settling down with his wife Sarah on a small farm where they grew corn and kept a few cows and pigs. Sarah came from one of the Moki families. Her people fled to California when the Oklahoma skies turned black and the soul became sawdust. She was as sweet and strong as a stereotype, with narrow blue eyes that saw a lot, but kept much of it to herself. Floyd worried Sarah from the minute he was born. He slipped so easily from the womb that later on she would question if there was even one pang when he came into this world. His face was flat with calm as the midwife laid him on her belly. There was no lusty cry as there will be from her other children. He just lay there for a minute or two, breathing softly with his eyes closed, as if he was thinking on some extremely serious matter. When he finally opened his eyes, Sarah did see that one was darker than the other, but it wouldn't be until later that she fully understand that one eyeball would be a shimmering green and the other a blazing blue. There would be other kids that were too scared to play with Floyd, not because of his eyes so much as for the way he was. How he would just sit back and watch things and not say a word for hours on end with them weird light-colored eyes. And as for the kids that weren't scared of him, Floyd found there would be a lot of pushing and shoving and a hard road to hoe. But from Floyd there would be no tears, only that peculiar thinking look as if he hadn't quite made up his mind about the kind of world he had entered into or just how he would behave in it. One day when he was 16, he didn't show up for dinner. Sarah had set his plates at the table as usual on the first night he didn't show, and then just as quietly picked the dishes up one by one when he didn't come in later. She washed and dried them as if he had eaten from them and placed the plates back in the cupboard. She did this the second night, too. She set Hammer's place, her own, the twins' places, and Floyd's. The dishes were laid out for the final time on that third night, and when he didn't come home, Sarah once again washed the plate, the spoon, and the fork as if he had used them. After she had finished the dishes, she stood for some time in the open door looking out over the cornfield. A breeze rustled the tips of the stalks, making the silk spark gold in the quilted darkness. The roof of the open country was so full of black that it made her feel as if she were in some movie theater or some giant tent with tiny silver dots painted on the ceiling to look like stars. She stood there for a long time, watching the wind playing in the corn. Then for an instant she let herself breathe a tiny sigh of relief at the thought of never seeing Floyd again. Hammer came and stood by her side, wondering why he couldn't muster up enough worry to go out and search for Floyd. He gave himself the excuse that it was from taking too many hits to the head. He wasn't in his right mind or strong enough to go and search for that boy. Besides, he couldn't leave Sarah alone with the twins. That just wouldn't be right. He put his hand on her shoulder, thinking that they had both just missed something terrible. But if anybody had come out and asked him what that was, he wouldn't have quite been able to put it into words. Thank you.
I am like blown away. I'm so thankful. I know that you're not feeling well, but I'm honestly so thankful that you were able to read that because that was so cool.
Thank you.
Woo! All right. Yeah. Okay. Now our final reader is Casey E. Berger. Casey E. Berger is the author of The Resonance Saga, a space opera trilogy set in the distant future of the Milky Way. As C.E. Berger, her middle grade Choose Your Own Adventure, Sisters from the Multiverse, comes out this October. She lives an academic life in New England. Take it away.
Thank you. So I will be reading from the first chapter of First Light, which is book 1 in the trilogy. Chapter 1. It was just behind her sternum, in that part of her chest that felt the most sheltered, where she could fold in on herself if she needed to. That was where she neatly wrapped the images of gore, the coppery smell of blood, the sensation of stepping on lifeless limbs. That was where she pictured storing it all away when her job demanded it. Lieutenant Commander J. Mill had seen enough violence and bloodshed in her 14 years of service that this part of her was carefully cultivated. It was a place of darkness, sealed away behind a will stronger than the alloys of the armor they wore into the field. Rarely did the door crack open and let the darkness out to sicken her. And it wasn't the destruction around her that left the way open today, that allowed the clammy tendril of fear to wrap around her insides. It wasn't the bodies strewn across the colony. It wasn't the smell of their rotting flesh, ghostly and faint, and perhaps only a trick of the mind after her suit's filters had scrubbed the air. It was the voice that sent a chill through her. Beside her, Lieutenant Salman Ozma picked his way through the bodies that had piled along the corridor, abandoned there once the gurneys and temporary beds had been packed 2 people deep. The emergency lighting still cast a flat light on the carnage. It had happened so fast. They didn't understand yet what it was, but they understood its purpose. That was clear before Jaya and the rest of the Avalon's company had set foot on this colony. The group that claimed responsibility for this attack called themselves the Sons of Priam. They claimed that if only by raising the old could they right the wrongs of the galactic powers and bring about a new world. Their leader, although he kept his name and his image from the propaganda they broadcast to the farthest reaches of Union-controlled space, spoke with a dark power. And his voice. It wasn't a particularly terrifying voice by most standards. It hadn't been altered to produce any effect, and yet it haunted her. Slightly breathy, with the rich timbre of the lowest notes of a flute, it made the tiny hairs on her forearms stand on end. Something in his voice tugged at her subconscious and dug into the deepest secrets in her mind and pulled them forward. Jaya crouched down, removing one of the sterile kits from her pack. This was as good a place as any she'd already passed to take samples. The hospital had been the first on this colony to send out the alert a mere 20 hours ago. The quickest of the victims had come straight here the moment they fell ill. Most had not been so fast to assume the worst. And as Jaya took in the white-walled corridor heaped with putrid corpses, she thought perhaps those who had waited had been better off. It was all over so fast. Every human and alien resident on this colony dead before the first relief ship could arrive and the military could quarantine the area. At least those who had not sought medical attention had been able to die at home, surrounded by loved ones. Corporal Elias Thompson's voice came over the comms. The implanted communicator in Jaya's ear broadcast his voice crisply, the fidelity so good she could hear the tears in his throat. She closed her eyes, wishing she could grant him some privacy, but they had a job to do. His older brother had been on Yangtze, one of the other colonies hit. Just yesterday, Thompson had been bragging about how the wages he sent home had allowed his brother to invest in new equipment for his farm, how bright his future would be. Jaya understood the loss of a brother. Her own brother's disappearance remained a jagged wound in her heart to this day, more than 2 decades later. But her family was one of those secrets the voice had stirred up, and they were roiling dangerously at the front of her mind right now. She held them close, her own private grief and fear. "No one moving on the 3rd floor," Thompson said. Infrared says the bodies are all cold here too. There are some offices though. Thought Sal might want to have a look. Good work, Corporal, Jaya replied. Sending Lieutenant Azuma to you now. She looked back at Sal, who nodded and began to pack up his own testing kits to join Thompson on the 3rd floor. Roger, Lieutenant Commander, Thompson said. Hey, Mill. Rhodes' voice broke through on a private line. Lieutenant Commander John Rhodes was Jaya's counterpart, leading his own small strike team through the government buildings just a kilometer away. I'm listening. We're about done over here, he said. Are you ready for exfil? Not quite, Jaya replied. Head to the rendezvous point, and we'll be there when we're done. Azuma's going to hit the hospital computers and see what he can find. You get anything good? Negative. No sign anyone saw this coming. We'll have the Quants work their magic, but it's like this place was cursed. You can say that again. Okay, we're headed out. Meet you at the RP. Rhodes signed off and left Jaya in the silence of her biohazard suit, crouched over a body. A sudden wave of grief rushed up in her, tightening her chest. She swallowed it back down and took a deep breath, closing that door. There would be time later. She took her last sample and checked her palm drive. The tiny computer, implanted in her skin, was wirelessly connected to a control panel on the wrist of her suit. She brought up a layout of the hospital, displayed as a 3-dimensional holographic map. 2 dots on the 3rd floor showed her where Sal and Thompson were located. A 3rd dot roamed the outside of the building. That would be Jordan Vargas, completing her perimeter check. The corporal was uncharacteristically quiet today. The team's internal channel was usually raucous with banter between Vargas and Thompson, but today there was only Jaya's own thinking to occupy her mind. Jaya interrupted the silence. Alpha team, report. On my final sweep, Vargas's voice was still brash, although without her usual swagger. I've checked all the floors, Thompson confirmed. I'm on 3 now with Azuma. This hospital's data security is a fucking joke. Jaya couldn't help but smile. That would be Sal. His sharp edges hadn't softened at all in the 10 years she had served with him. I take it you'll be done soon then, she replied dryly. Download in progress, Sal said. We'll have all the automated data, but I'll be shocked if anyone in this hospital made any notes once the crowds rolled in, and considering they were sick too. He paused, and Jaya finished sealing up the sample bag while she waited. Long gaps in the conversation were also typical of Sal. She could picture him now, his dark brown eyes narrowed at the screen in front of him, his previous train of thought suspended indefinitely like a hung code until he finished whatever had distracted him. So we won't have much in the way of on-the-ground description, but we should have lots of data to process. Could find a pattern, Sal concluded. I've got everything I need. Time to go then, Jaya said. Bravo team is waiting for us. She switched to the master channel. Avalon, this is Alpha 1. Mission accomplished. All participants accounted for. Bravo team is at the RP, and Alpha team is en route, requesting exfil. Lieutenant Lupo is on her way in the shuttle, Alpha 1. The Avalon's captain, Peter Armstrong, replied, his voice warm and determined. We're expecting you. Come on home. Thank you, Captain. The rendezvous point was half a kilometer outside the capital, but Arcadian Gardens was a tiny agricultural colony, and calling the capital a city would be generous. It spanned less than 2 kilometers north to south. It was even shorter east to west. Its population was a few thousand, nearly all humans. While other colonies boasted thriving multi-species populations, agricultural colonies like this one weren't a draw for residents from any of the other civilizations of the galaxy. Outside the capital, agricultural compounds swept along the curve of the planet, and the remaining 60,000 citizens of Arcadian Gardens lived there, managing the crops that they exported to richer colonies and stations in the United Human Nations. Or used to. Preliminary sweeps showed a cold and desolate countryside. No heat signatures, no living beings, human, alien, or livestock. Not anymore. It hadn't been all that different from the colony where Jaya had spent her teen years. Her gut tightened, and she had the sudden urge to call her uncles. They reached the rendezvous point in short time. Bravo team stood in the wheat field, 4 figures shrouded in bulky suits, stark against the daylight in this empty world. Approaching RP, Jaya announced. We see you, Alpha team, Rhodes replied. Ready to go home? Very. A rush of air buffeted their suits as the shuttle descended. The wheat in the field compressed and rippled, the only motion they had seen in hours, as Lieutenant Lynn Lupo brought the shuttle gently down, opening the airlock aperture.
Oh, I love that, the atmosphere and the creepiness and the, very good. Whew. All right, well, at this time, I would like to say thank you so much to everyone who came today.